Hi, my name is Jonathan Gaylord, and welcome to this installment of our video series called Modern Faith, where we take a look at the Christian faith through the lens of the 21st century. I'm very excited today to be joined by my good friend Christopher Corbin, martial arts expert, woodworker extraordinaire, father to the stars, also has a PhD in theology, and is a priest in the Episcopal Diocese of South Dakota, if that's the kind of stuff that you're looking for. But Chris and I are going to talk about something that you see all over the place in the Gospels. Jesus begins a lot of his stories, a lot of his parables, a lot of his teaching with the phrase, the kingdom of God is like. And so we're going to unpack what does that mean? And we're also going to try our hand at bringing some of those parables, some of those sayings into the 21st century, asking the question, if Jesus showed up today, October 2020, and looked around, and tried to tell us what the kingdom of God would be like, what would he say? What would those stories be? What would those parables be? I'm really excited to look and to see what Chris brings and to see where our conversation leads, and I invite you to come along with us. But before we get there, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel so that you can stay up to date with all of the Modern Faith videos as they come out, and go back and watch our previous videos. I promise you the quality is slowly getting better. To paraphrase John Wesley, we are moving on to passable. So now that you've liked and subscribed, let's get to that conversation. All right, so we are here with my good friend Chris Corbin, and we are going to just kind of rapid fire go through some of the parables, some of the sayings of Jesus, where Jesus tells us this is what the kingdom of God is, and we're going to try to best we can put it into 21st century terms. So we're going to start off with a pretty easy one, and that one is the parable of the mustard seed. Often what we heard growing up was, you get this big tree and it's this little seed, and it's a small faith that becomes this big thing. But what's interesting about the mustard seed and the mustard plant that Jesus is talking about is that it is essentially a weed. People in ancient Palestine did not want mustard plants in their fields because you couldn't get them out. And
It was
so
unclean for a kosher garden, I think.
unclean for a kosher garden too. So uh, I was just thinking of it like there's a plant that I love planting called tansy. And once you've planted tansy, even if you pull it up, it's going to come back. And so I was thinking of it like that, but like also the religiously unclean element. So when Jesus says the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed, that like what would be like, I have one in my head, but Chris, like what would be for you kind of the equivalent plant for today?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple things that we can look at. So one of the things that comes to mind is like Melaleuca in South Florida. Fast growing, does really really well, kills all the native plants. Um, Zebra mussels or like any other invasive
Yeah.
species, those kind of are what I think of like really hard to get rid of once they're there.
Mm-hmm.
And are pretty small and undetectable, and it takes a lot to try and figure out if it's even sort of making its way in.
Yeah. So the one that I have in my brain we talked about before we started was kudzu. Like kudzu just completely covers
Yeah,
mountains in southern Appalachia. Think it, like even broadening out to animals like South Florida iguanas. Like once they're
yeah,
there, you're stuck with stuck with them.
right.
Lionfish and reefs would be another one. But it's like it's amazing that here's Jesus, like here's this thing you don't want, and the kingdom of God is like that thing you don't want,
That's
right?
right. Well, and this is one of the things that's interesting to me, even about the parable, right? And that it ends with all the birds come and nest in it,
Yeah,
which we think is, oh, that's great. It's providing shelter, but I don't like birds in my garden.
yeah,
I don't want to create shelter for birds, or like in my context here in South Dakota in the Black Hills, I don't like planting things that are going to attract more deer to my yard to eat my plants.
yeah. Like it's like in North Carolina it would be like, uh, and that weed you plant will attract all the groundhogs
Yeah, that's
to your
right.
garden. Um, so like what do you make of that? That here's Jesus saying this is the kingdom of God. It's a thing you don't want, and it's going to bring more things you don't want.
Well, I think at a sort of most pious level, the idea is an image and a system set up for like what the neat and orderly society is going to look like, and the kingdom of God is going to explode that no matter what. It's always going to go beyond and be more than and incorporate people who you think are not sort of worthy or actively like unpleasant think people and groups of people that you don't want around. This is the people who are most actively invited, which actually might get into one of the other the kingdom of gods is like if we talk about the wedding banquet. It's but it also is not uncharacteristic based on what Jesus teaches about in other places, right? He says, I'm here for the sick, not for the healthy. He comes to bring in the lost sheep of Israel. He's hanging out with tax collectors and sinners and prostitutes. It's not like Jesus was um, just bringing something out that was a surprise when he brings these parables in. Like everything that Jesus is talking about is pointing to the fact that what sort of good, wholesome, upstanding society thinks is neat and proper and orderly, the kingdom of God is going to radically disrupt that.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's the thing. One of the goals that I have of these videos is like we've gotten so used to talking about what faith is that we like have just almost in some ways like inoculated ourselves to like this completely radical nature of it. That it is especially in America and growing up in the South, and living in the South, like there's just this culture, like, and it's like this assumed culture of Christianity. And when Christianity becomes the culture, you lose the reality that this is like a thing that is just like completely like Jesus shows up to do that radical blowing up of our expectations and our ideals. Um, yeah. But say more. Uh, bring us to the wedding banquet.
So banquet, right? Like that's what we sort of can turn to next. So at least in Matthew's telling of this, and if anyone has been using the lectionary recently, this is a passage that just came up. Um, Jesus says the kingdom of God is like a king who has a lot of money and he wants to throw a banquet and he invites all his rich friends and they're all like, "Nah, dog, I'm busy." Um, and they don't come to this free meal, and so the king's like, okay, well, he says to his steward, he's like, okay, go out and find like all the poor, the injured, the really the people who are sort of like shiftless and just hanging out on the streets. Just go find all those people who don't have anything better to do and bring them to the wedding banquet. And of course, like then it comes down to everyone comes and they're hanging out and they're having a good time, and there's one guy who doesn't have the right clothes on and he gets thrown out into the outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, to be fair, that guy also was almost certainly offered the proper clothing to come in and just chose not to wear it. So it's not like he just didn't know it was up. But
Like the host of the party was like a good host and uh, was going to take care of all the guests that came. Um,
yeah, that's right. And so, I mean, I think that I actually think that this is one where there's not that much like
yeah,
translation that's necessary. Like so, a rich guy's throwing a party and he invites his rich friends and they're like, nah, dog, I'm too
yeah,
busy. And so he goes and invites a bunch of homeless people on the streets to come eat his
yeah.
fancy food.
So one of the parables that I wanted to bring up is the story in Matthew of the guy who finds a treasure in a field, goes and hides the treasure again, then goes out and just buys the entire field. Um, like the update of that story for me is like a guy, person who just like goes into a record store, is flipping through records, and finds there in the rack like a first pressing of the Beatles' White Album, and like it's so excited they put the album back, they run out, they call up their real estate agent, they say let's buy this record store, they buy the record store, um, and it's I really like this parable because it's something that like there's a lot to chew on even as you modernize it, even as you like put it and read it through a 21st century lens. um, like why not just buy the record, like if that's the thing you're excited about? um, why hide the treasure again? Like why not just take it? Like um,
Right. Well, and I think that part of what it's getting at too is that like I wonder even if it's more modernizable about like you're going through an antique store and you find um like you find like a Rembrandt or something like an
Yeah,
original Rembrandt that they don't realize what they've got, because I think the point is that like the treasure itself is worth more than the field it's in. And so it's cheaper. At least this is how I try to make it make sense. Is that like you would pay more if you actually brought it to the attention of the owner, and you would risk them finding out what they've got and saying, "Oh no, I'm not going to sell that to you for uh, uh, whatever was originally priced for, because clearly this is something that's really, 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 really expensive." And instead, you're just like, "I'm just not going to run that risk. I'm just going to buy the store and everything in it." And then they can't not sell it to
yeah.
me.
So like, there's this like element of I'm going to cheat you out of this thing that like I know what it is, and I'm going to like take advantage of the fact that I have this knowledge that you don't. Um, which like in and of itself is problematic, I guess, when you're thinking about
Yeah. Well,
the
yeah.
kingdom of God. Like, um, but like I guess at that point it becomes like this thing that the kingdom of God, and I guess it also depends on like where do we read our story, like our because I guess I've always assumed that we're the person going through the antique store, the record store, the comic book store looking for the thing, and like what if it's not us? Like what if Jesus is the person going through the store and finds this treasure and then like gives everything up for this treasure,
Yeah.
um, which might make more sense in terms of both like the story itself and knowing who God is, that God finds this treasure and that there is nothing that will keep God from this treasure, and then like then we'd have to read that humanity or creation is the treasure itself. Um,
Yeah. And I mean, this is, of course, one of the places where the parables have multiple layers. That there's not like the
yeah,
interpretation, right? There's not one way that you're supposed to do it. And in a lot of ways, the sort of like wrestling with it is the point. It's not like you're supposed to just easily get to,
mm-hmm.
well, here's the moral of the story. Um, and I think yes, that's a reading that's possible, but I also think it relates back to sort of the whole, in order to gain your life you must lose it, and in order to follow Jesus you have to give up everything to follow Jesus. But there's this sort of idea that um you give everything away, and this is like the pearl of great price. The
Yeah,
kingdom of heaven is like a pearl merchant um who finds this one pearl and sells
mm-hmm.
everything just for this one pearl. um that there's this sort of idea of, well, yeah, you, in order to get it you have to give up every single thing that you have, but it turns out that like what you're giving up everything for is something you never could have afforded on your own, and it's infinitely more valuable than everything that you had that you're
yeah,
giving up. But you like, that doesn't sort of lessen the real loss or pain of the
mm-hmm.
requirement of giving everything up.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, in the last video, I think I wound up talking about that take up your cross and follow me, and the sacrifice required for faith and in faith, um, is being a thing that we probably pay lip service to, and like the church
Yeah.
is just um, like there is an extreme version of it where we are like way out on the fringes of like you approach kind of like I don't want to say like cultish like buy in to a particular community, but like the church itself and the individual members of the church are supposed to be acting out and actually being this kind of focused thing, focused on God and focused on God's love and mercy and power in the world, um, not for the benefit of one person, uh, but for the benefit of all. Uh,
Yeah. But I mean, there is, and this is one of the places where I guess we should say is that like we don't want to domesticate it too much, and there is kind of an absurd, almost cultish vibe to like what Jesus is
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about. Again, like in Matthew or something, where I'm not sure how crass I can get in terms of like what Jesus is actually
Hmm.
saying, but you know, he basically tells a guy to like tell his dead dad to like
Yeah, yeah.
shove it right like but if we might we can probably amplify that in terms of actually getting to the cultural ramifications, but he's you know he says um screw your dead dad,
Yeah, yeah.
follow me.
Whoever puts their hand to the plow, right, um, and looks back is
Yeah,
worth it. What are we looking back on? What are we looking back for? And how is that keeping us from the hope of the kingdom, um, the hope of God's reign? I'm going to say thank you to Chris for his time, and uh, like to know what you, our friends and viewers out there, think. Is there anything, any parable that you've come across in the Bible or in your thinking or in your studies and your reading, and how can you update or at least tell that parable kind of with contemporary language and contemporary examples? And did any of the stuff we talked about resonate with you? Like, how do you feel about this idea of almost ridiculous radicalness of the kingdom challenging kind of the world that we live in? Would love to hear from you. Drop any thoughts you have in the comments, and make sure you hit like and subscribe. And I'm going to drop some links up here for some links to stuff that Chris does. I don't know if Chris has a YouTube channel, but he's got some writings and some graphic design stuff that you might be interested in checking out. And is there anything else you wanna
no, I'm just glad
yeah,
to have been able to be in this conversation. Thanks for having me.
it's been fun. All right, well, thank you everybody, and we will see you next time.